Good morning. I'm going to be continuing my discussion on the faithful and discreet slave class. I started during my last couple parts talking about Matthew chapter 24 to understand the context of verse 45. However, as I was preparing this part, I realized I made a pretty big mistake. Before I can get to verse 45, I've got to deal with a big mistake that I made. Chapter 24, if you want to follow along, I'm going to be going further into this here. I discussed with you last time chapter 24 verses 1 to 14, and I was trying to make the point that we should look at this mainly from the first century perspective. And when the disciples were asking Christ about in verse 3, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your presence and of the conclusion of the system of things? This verse is broken down into 3 questions. And basically I was saying that we should just make it into one question to make it simple, and that question was, when is the destruction of Jerusalem imminent? Now, and I also was making the point that when the disciples asked this question, were they aware that the world was going to continue for another 2,000 years? How much information had Christ given to his disciples? So when the disciples were asking the question, were they simply asking about what they were going to experience in their lifetime? Or was it really a 2 or 3 part question where they're saying, when is Jerusalem going to be destroyed? What is the sign that is very near at hand, so that we can leave Jerusalem before that happens? Or are they saying, and on top of that, are they saying what's going to happen 2,000 years from now when you destroy the entire world? Or as the New World Translation doesn't use the word world, they say conclusion of system of things, or as the footnote, they call it order of things, which they're claiming is a more accurate rendering of the Greek. However, when I was reading, I was sloppy in preparing. When I'm reading further in Matthew chapter 24, it was very clear and obvious that Christ Jesus begins to talk about the future 2,000 years from now in his answer. One of the question is, the first 14 verses that I did read to you, was that something that would just apply to Jerusalem, or was Christ putting a double meaning in this answer? Where there's going to be wars, food shortages, and earthquakes. Was that a double meaning? But then again, those are things that have always been through history, and are not to really clear. I'm not going to keep talking. I'm going to read verse 29 with you, just to show that this has a future application here. Verse 29 says, immediately after the tribulation. All right, so if this is kind of going on from verse 21 and 22, where it says there's going to be a great tribulation that has not occurred since the world's beginning until now, no, nor will occur again. In fact, unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved. But on account of the chosen ones, those days will be cut short. I'm reading verse 21 and 22. Now, the tribulation that the Jews experienced when the Romans blocked them in uh, was supposed to be absolutely horrendous. Um, um, was this verse a double meaning, saying that there's going to be a great tribulation, both for Jerusalem and for what we are, the whole world is going to experience in the final part of the days. But it's very interesting, this verse where it talks about the chosen ones. It says, but on account of the chosen ones, those days will be cut short. Who are the chosen ones? I'm going to read some other verses with you to show that these chosen ones are the anointed ones, which Jehovah's Witnesses take the number 144,000 literal. That these are also the remaining ones, the remaining seed of the woman in Revelation. I'm going to take a look at that, and they form collectively the bride of Jesus Christ. So during the first century, all the believers were anointed Christians primarily. That's another question I'm confused about with the Jehovah's Witnesses is were 100% of them anointed, or 90% of them anointed, because they believe that the New Testament was written only, well, primarily for these chosen ones, these anointed ones. So it says that on account of the chosen ones, those days will be cut short. So if you go back to the first century, there's this tribulation that Jerusalem is having, and it's so horrible that God is cutting these days short, or else no flesh would survive. This verse seems to have an application in the future. I mean, if the faithful Christians followed Jesus' advice and fled to the mountains, then were they really experiencing a lot of tribulation? I don't know about that. If you could help me with that, I would be grateful. The way that Jehovah's Witnesses explain it. See, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that before Jesus Christ died, that nobody went to heaven, which I don't completely understand or see the scriptural basis for that. I'm not saying it's wrong. Maybe that's right. And that the anointed started to be chosen ones, anointed, 144,000 started to be gathered after Christ's death. And then for 2,000 years, there's sort of this dark period where God doesn't really seem to be involved with people. I don't understand this either. And it doesn't seem like there is, after the first century, seems that true Christianity just fizzled out, and the Catholic Church seemed to come into power, and there isn't this revival. Martin Luther seems to start things in motion where he gets Protestants breaking free from the Catholic Church, and then from then on it splinters, it goes crazy in the 19th century, where all these new Christian denominations seems to proliferate. You get the Mormons, you get Pentecostal, you get all these branches of Christianity, Jehovah's Witnesses, that start up um, with their own unique variations of understanding. A lot of the focus back then was on the return of Christ, on this chapter, Matthew 24, understanding, Christ's return. Um, so the Jehovah's Witnesses teach that these chosen ones, that the 144,000, was not fully numbered yet. Let's say there was 100,000 faithful anointed Christians back in the first century. That still leaves 44,000 anointed seed that God has to fulfill the number. And according to Matthew 24, it's saying unless these days are cut short, these chosen ones are not going to be saved. So at the end of the world, during the final tribulation, there has to be anointed Christians still on the earth, of this the woman's seed. What was the point I was trying to make? So yes, I was talking about my confusion here. So again, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that everybody that died before Christ has a hope to live on the earth. Now, when these anointed ones died, like for example, the 12 disciples eventually died, were they immediately resurrected as spirits in heaven? Have they been in heaven for the last 2,000 years, ruling with or preparing for well, ruling in a sense, preparing for the future when Satan is abyssed for the 1,000 years, or I sort of remember being when I was a Jehovah's Witness that the resurrection did not start until the Lord's day. I could be wrong about this. If somebody can clarify that with me, that for 2,000 years the disciples lay asleep in the grave, and then during the Lord's day they rose. I'm not sure about that. And I also remember being a witness that there was a point in time that, as far as I understand this, that when the Jehovah's Witnesses started with Charles Taze Russell in the late 1800s, that the majority, they called themselves Bible students back then, but when they were baptized, they became anointed. And that the majority of the original Jehovah's Witnesses were almost all anointed. They all had the heavenly hope. And there was a point in time around after 1914, I don't know if it was 1920 or 1930, they have these dates, and I don't understand the biblical basis for it, but there was a point after 1914 where Christ was now gathering the other sheep, those with the earthly hope. That primarily everybody who was baptized was now part of the other sheep who I'm repeating myself, who had the earthly hope. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness or an ex-witness that has pieced the puzzle together, that can explain this, I'd like to make sense of it. I'd like to understand it. Please explain it to me. I've tried to ask Jehovah's Witnesses for help understanding this, but uh, they don't they're not interested in talking to me. Okay, so I'm going to read verses. Hold on a second. Verse 29 to 31 here. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will beat themselves in lamentation, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. This is interesting here. They use the word coming, the Son of, and they will see the Son of Man coming. There's a different Greek word for it here. I can't pronounce it. Erkomenon, something like that. If you remember in verse 3 where a lot of translators are using the word coming, but Jehovah's Witnesses use the word presence. But there's a different word here. It says, they will see the Son of Man coming on clouds of heaven with power and great glory. See, this verse is really describing when Christ is going to take action. He's going to it seems like he's ready for battle or for judgment or but the way the Jehovah's Witnesses use the word presence, they're saying Christ has been present since 1914. It's where the focus is more on the harvest, where the sheep and the goats are being separated here. But in verse 30, it actually does use the word coming, and it's really associated with Christ coming to act here. Verse 31, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet sound, and they will gather his chosen ones, together from the four winds. Now, when you hear four winds, it probably makes you think of Revelation, where you have the angels holding back the four winds of destruction. I'm gonna get into Revelation in a second. They will gather his chosen ones together from the four winds, from one extremity of the heavens to the other extremity. Verse 36. I'm gonna go on here. Concerning that, so I'm also showing that I was really wrong during my last presentation, where I'm saying that people make the assumption that this is about our world, and this clearly is part of it is about our world, at least part of it. Maybe the whole thing is. Were the disciples confused when Jesus was giving them this answer, or were they really getting it? Verse 36 goes, concerning that day and hour nobody knows, neither the angels of the heavens nor the Son, but only the Father. And this is very interesting. For just as the days of Noah were, so the presence, it's using the word presence again, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. For as they were in those days before the flood, eating and drinking, men marrying, and women being given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and they took no note until the flood came and swept them all away, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. And then if you go down 3 verses, keep on the watch therefore, because you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. So it sounds like they're using the word coming and presence a little bit interchangeably here. As the days of Noah were, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. Verse 36, it says again, that day and hour nobody knows. The day and hour of what? the day and hour where God's going to act, right? It's not talking about 1914. When the rain started coming down for Noah with the ark, it says that people were carrying on life as usual. They avoided the signs, and you see that in this world today with all the craziness going on. People are not turning to God or to Christ. People are busy with their life, making money, despite the fact the signs are very strong that our world is in trouble. When it says the word presence, is for just as in the days of Noah, where so the presence of the Son of Man will be. The point I'm trying to make is that when the disciples asked the question, when will these things be? What will be in the sign of your presence? They want to know when Christ is going to act. When are you doing? When are you coming out with your sword and killing people? The sign of your presence. 1914. Christ is, according to the Jehovah's Witnesses, they say Christ is ruling and acting in a sense. I struggle with this belief because even before 1914, there was just as much preaching by Charles Taze Russell for 40, 50 years. The change between the preaching, the world went to war. The harvest separation seemed to go on hold or standby while World War One broke out. So I think the Jehovah's Witnesses are running the wrong way with their with this word presence, trying to drive home their 1914 point.